Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kim from ExshawQuilts.com, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to attach your binding to your quilt. So I have used 2.5 inch binding strips, and we have folded those in half and we have pressed them. So then you're going to take your raw edge of your folded binding and line it up to the raw edge of your quilt. We're gonna leave a flap, if you will, a flap. We wanna make sure that I like to leave quite a bit of flap just to be on the safe side of everything. So I'm going to load this into my machine, and I've left, like you can see, I'm not gonna sew this area at all because we need to attach the binding together to close off the quilt. So we're going to make sure that we have a 1/2 inch seam all the way around, and I'm going to show you how to do the corners as well. So I'm just going to put my pressure foot down there, and you can use binding clips. I find that that is really helpful, but I don't always use them because I've done it a million times. So here we go. I'm going to back stitch a little bit there, and then we can start, and we're going to go right up to about a 1/2 inch. So if you fold, I'm hoping you can see this. So right here is the corner, right? So if you take your binding strip and you fold it, so there's like a 45-degree angle there, and kind of press it, because we are going to stop sewing just before the edge there. So you can see where I've pressed that 45-degree angle, and we're going to sew right up to that line that we've made, like that. Give it a back stitch. And what I like to do is actually, what I forgot to tell you to do is we're going to sew right off that corner. So I'm going to stitch one more time and then lift the foot but not the needle. And I hope I'm not moving you around too much. My tripod is kind of in the way. It's a little bit tricky to try to sew this on camera. Put your foot back down, and you're going to sew right off to that corner, like that. So now we have, if you can see, we have a 45-degree angle, and we've sewn right off the edge of our quilt, that corner. So now what we want to do is we're going to fold the binding. I'll go nice and slow, and hopefully I'm just going to stand up so I can see what you're seeing in the camera. So we want to keep with that 45-degree angle, and we're going to take, I'm going to go really slow for you here. Hopefully, maybe I can zoom in a little bit. Okay. So now that we have that 45-degree angle, right? Remember, we pressed it and we've sewn right off at a 45-degree angle, right off that corner edge. So then we're going to bring the binding up and align it. So we have this little flap here, right? Well, we're going to align the edge of our binding right to the edge of the raw edge of our quilt. You see that? And then if you're not comfortable, you can absolutely pin this if you want, but I'm going to take it right over to the machine, and I'm going to put my foot down. I'm just going to bring it up so you can see a little bit more. And then we're going to continue sewing. So I'm going to sew a couple of stitches, back stitch right off, and then sew right on the edge. We want to sew up to that corner, almost to that corner, and do another 45-degree angle. I'm going to make sure that my binding isn't getting sewn underneath because I wasn't paying attention. I'm trying to teach. Okay. And it's important not to pull your binding tight. You want it to be snug, but don't put a whole lot of tension on your binding, because otherwise when you're done your binding, your quilt will be a little bit wonky because it'll be pulling and fighting the binding, and you don't want that. So we're almost. Okay, I'm going to stop right there so you can see, hopefully in the camera. And now we're going to mark. You can do this too. This might be easy. So mark with your nail exactly where that corner is. And then we're just going to bring it up. And it's tricky. The binding can be a bit of a pain. And we're going to make another 45-degree angle. Sometimes you got to reposition it. Just take your time. It's not a race, right? I'm going to make a 45-degree angle. Kind of give it a press so you know where to sew to. And then unfold it. And then we're going to sew up to that line that we just made. Like that. One more. And then remember, we're going to lift the foot, not the needle. We're going to lift the foot of our machine. And then we're going to reposition our quilt. This is hard with I apologize if it's moving. Like I said, I've got the tripod in the way. Okay, put the foot, dang it. Put the foot back down, and you're going to sew right off that corner at a 45-degree angle. Like that. And now we have a perfect little 45-degree angle. You see that? We've made, hopefully you can see that in camera. I'm going to stand up just so I can see. It is too bad that I did it in white, and I apologize. Next tutorial, I will have a different color of quilt, or maybe I will do a contrasting color so you can see it even better. So we've done that 45-degree that matched up to our corner, and then we sewed right off that corner. Right? So then now, again, we're going to do that 45-degree angle, and then we're going to kind of pinch it and hold it in place. And then we're going to take our binding and line it up to that corner. So we have like this little flap here. Do you see that? And we're going to just align it on our quilt. And what you could do is you could put a binding clip here. But like I said, I've done it so often that I don't really need to do it. I probably should sometimes. And then we're going to put the foot back down, and we're going to start sewing again. We're going to back stitch and reposition everything just to make sure that our binding isn't underneath the quilt. I've done that before and it sucks. And remember, we're not pulling this binding. We're just giving it, we're just aligning that binding to the side. It's nice and straight, firm but not tight, if that makes sense. Like you're not pulling on this binding strip, because we don't want to pucker our quilt after we're all done. And just keep on going. Reposition the quilt as you go. So we're almost at that corner again. And we're going to, I just need a little more slack with my strip here. And then we're going to mark, you can mark it with your nail. This works, or the Huron marker as well, or whatever tool that you have. I have really short nails, so we can just mark this side of the binding. So we haven't flipped the binding at all. The binding is still laying flat, and we just want to mark our fabric so we know where that corner is, and we know where to fold and also sew to, because I'm gonna see if, oh, that doesn't work. I'm sorry. I was hoping that I could kind of, maybe if I turn my light off, I'm getting a cast. There you go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so we want to mark this corner, right? So you can just mark it with whatever tool that you have. I just, so I have this available to me. So I have to make sure that I know where that corner is, right? Because we need to make a 45-degree angle. So we've marked that. So we kind of have a feel for where our corner is. We want to make sure that we get a nice, and then just give the binding a firm press with your fingers. I hope you can see that. I know it's kind of a little awkward. So now we can see where our corner is at a 45-degree angle. We're going to sew right up. We're going to sew right up to there. Our last stitch is actually going to be right on that line. And then we're going to lift our foot, knot our needle, and then we're going to reposition the quilt so we can sew right off this corner. Okay? I'm going to turn my machine back on. And we've marked it on this side so we can see where that last stitch. Okay. Can put our foot down and we're just gonna sew right off that corner. And cut your thread. I have a thread cutter on the Juki, which is amazing. I love that feature. Okay, I'm just gonna turn this light off because I think that kind of helped for you to see the shadow. Okay, so we have sewed right up to that line, that 45-degree line, and we have sewed right off of our corner there. So now we want to fold again like that. Okay, we have that 45-degree angle again, and then we're going to take our binding and we're going to line the edge of the binding that we just folded right on our quilt like that. You see what we just did? So then we have this little flappy. Okay, and now we're going to sew it. So we're going to take it back over to the machine and stick it underneath the foot. I'm going to reposition there because I was a little bit off of the quilt. I don't like that. Okay, I'm going to turn the machine back on so I can operate it. And then we're going to give it a couple stitches, back stitch, and then stitch right up to the next corner. And as you go, just reposition your binding if you're not using the clips. I find clips actually annoying to use, so I found that this process works the best. And make sure that your quilt is nice and flat and that your binding is nice and flat and it's aligned. The raw edges are all perfectly aligned, as perfect as you can be. I mean, I am not perfect. I don't do this to be perfect. I do it for fun. So we are almost at that next corner. Okay, we're almost at that corner. And do you see how my binding strip attached almost in that corner, which is unfortunate, but you never know until you get going. So again, we need to find that corner, which is hiding underneath my machine. So I'm just going to do this one really quick. Okay, so we are getting very close to the end of our binding strip. All right, so we have finished sewing around our quilt here, the binding, and we have left quite a gap in between our binding strips where we meet up to close the quilt off. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this strip here and we're going to lay it down nice on our quilt. And we're going to fold that section like that. And then we're going to take this binding onto this side and we're going to leave about an 1/8 of an inch gap between them. So about like that, like so. I think that looks good. And we're gonna give them a press on the iron, and I will be right back. We have just come back from the iron, and I've given a press to our binding strips. And what we're gonna wanna do now is just take this strip without twisting it and just open it up. So we can see that right here, we can see our pressed line there. And we're going to make an X. So we're going to open this up so we can see the press line on this portion of our strip, and we're just going to line those up. And sometimes, you know what, this helps too, is to take this, just put a clip in there so we don't have to fight that all the time, because it can be a little bit annoying. And that's where our line is. And that's where the line is on this side. And we're just going to maneuver those together so they align. There we go. And now we're going to sew from this line. We gotta move that down a little bit. We're just going to sew from this diagonal all the way down to this corner. Take it out of the machine. Remove our clip. And then we're going, before we cut this excess off, we want to make sure that the binding strip is going to lay the way that we want, and it looks really, really good. There is no puckering or anything like that. So then now we can cut this excess binding strip off, and I don't have my proper scissors over here, but so we're going to use these little kid scissors like that. And you can press this seam open. Sometimes I just press it with my finger, like so. Fold it in. And you can give it another press if you like to kind of make it look a little bit better. And then I can start sewing. So I'm gonna do a couple of back stitches, and now I'm just gonna be really slow and intentional about this because it can be a little bit finicky, and sometimes it does. I have a little bit of a pucker, but it's not a show quilt. So I'm not going to stress about it too much. All right, so now that we have attached our binding, now we're ready to whip stitch this binding closed. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this binding over, and we're going to pick out all of the little threads here, and then I'm going to show you how to whip stitch this closed. So what we're going to do is fold this over, turn our quilt, and fold it over like that and whip stitch it closed. The other alternative that you can do if you don't want to hand sew it closed is you can machine it closed. So in order to do that, you would just fold this binding over, put it in your machine. So the one leg of the machine, the farthest prong on your foot is right on the edge of the folded binding, and then you can sew it down. Or you could go really, really tight to that edge and have, like what I normally do is like I'll have the foot just on the lip of the binding strip, and then I will sew it, but I go really, really slow if I do that because sometimes you can miss it. But I will show you how to do the whip stitch to close this all together. This is hand binding is like one of my favorite things to do. So we're gonna go over to the table now. Now that we're over at the table, I'm going to show you how to whip stitch the binding on the other side. So this is the front of the the quilt, and what we're going to do is flip our quilt. So we're on the back side of the quilt, and we're going to take the binding and kind of give it a bit of a tug, a very gentle tug all the way around. And you're going to fold over your corners and snip off any like loose little threads, because they can kind of get in the way. What you could also do to make this even easier for your corners is and just snip off, not your binding. You don't want to snip your binding, so fold that out of the way, but you can snip off the very tip of the corners, and it just makes it so there's less bulk in them. So you can do that and then flip over all of your corners. So I like to give it a little bit of a tug, and I apologize that my camera is moving. This tripod isn't the greatest, but it's what I got right now. So I'm just going to make sure that the binding is out of the way and snip off the corner. You don't want to snip the corner. So if you can see, that's what I've done here. You don't want to snip off that corner, because you're going to cut your binding, and that would suck, and you're going to have a hole there. So but just the very tip of your corner, and it just helps with the bulk, so it makes the binding the corners even easier. So just make sure that you don't snip the binding, because I have done that before in the past, and that sucks. I had a hole in my corner, and that's not what you want. So yeah, so you just want to kind of give it a snug tug, but make sure that you don't have any like loose little, and I usually snip those off as I sew. I'm not too concerned about them right now, but if you wanted to do that right now, then that's fine too. So again, make sure that your binding isn't in the way before you do that, before you snip off your corners. Okay, so this is the last corner. Yeah, there we go. So we are ready to start whip stitching our binding closed. So I like to smooth everything down just so it's nice and neat. And what you can do is you can fold this over and use binding clips to kind of pin it closed. You don't have to. So I will sporadically use my binding clips. Honestly, most of the time what I do is I only use them on the corners of my binding, because it's just easier that way. So when you get to a corner, after you've kind of brought out your corner and it's sitting like that, again, I apologize for the camera, you're going to kind of fold it so it's nice and neat, like so. You see that? You have a 45-degree angle coming from that corner. I'm going to bring you down a little bit. Maybe that'll help with the moving too. All right, so you're just going to fold it over so you get a nice, neat 45-degree angle from that corner. And that you can pin. Well, I guess clip in this case. I like using the clips, binding clips. They're so much easier than pins, because pins bend because of how much fabric you got in there. And one thing I do want to I guess recommend before you get started, or while you're sewing rather, is, so I'm going to bring you back up again. So these corners have to match. Like, so if you fold over your binding clip or your binding, you want to make sure that whatever you fold up here, it matches to the corner down here. So if you pulled over too much binding strip on this part and not enough at the other end, it's just going to look weird and it's not going to quite match up. So you want to pay attention to that as well. So what I like to do is just go ahead and like kind of line everything up to see where we're at. You got a clip. And just pin the corners if you want. You can pin the rest so it's all aligned with each corner, because it does suck when they're not aligned. So you can do that, have that a middle and then another corner to kind of keep everything in line with each other, so you don't have to clip, you don't have to use clips every like 2 inches or something. I mean, you can, especially when you're first starting out, you can totally do that, whatever your comfort level is, but you don't have to. And if you find that there's a little bit more bulk than you want, you can clip a little bit of this fabric, but don't clip. Make sure that you don't cut your binding strip for one, or you don't cut, you don't snip this line off, because then your binding will fall off, right? So, okay, so we are ready to start the whip stitch. So in order to do the whip stitch by hand, what you're going to want is some pearl cotton in number 8. So it looks like this. I have a full tutorial on hand quilting, so you can check that out as well. I also have a blog post full of the different supplies that you might need. But anyway, so this is a pearl cotton by DMC. I really like it, number 8. And then I have my leather thimble. And then I also have a silicone thimble, and this is how I wear them, because I push the needle with the leather and I pull it with the silicone. So I've already loaded my needle up and we are going to start. So I've got clips on a couple of the corners to kind of start with, but what we're going to do is we're going to pop our knot first. So what I have done is I have a knot on this end of my thread. In order to do that knot, what you're going to do is wrap it around the needle twice, pull it down all the way to the end of your thread, and then you'll get that knot. All right, so to begin, what we're going to do is we're going to go underneath the binding, because we're going to hide this knot in there. So we're never going through the front of the quilt, because then you'll have stitches on the front of the quilt and that's not pretty. So make sure that you do not go through all layers of the quilt, never the top, okay? So we don't want our stitches to show up on the front side, the pretty side of the quilt, okay? So we're hiding our stitches. Okay, so we've popped our knot. Just gonna clip the end here to hide it, like so. And we're going to fold over our binding like that. And we're folding to the back of the work. So remember, we're not stitching on the front. So we've come out of our, not in the binding strip, and in the backing and the backing of our quilt. So now what we're gonna do is, wherever we've come up from the backing, we're going to go into the binding strip, but it's kind of like a tunnel. So we're going to go in through that crease that we've made by folding our binding over. We're just going to use that tunnel to hide our stitches. So we've come through just the binding through that tunnel, and we're going to bring our needle, pull our needle, make sure it's not wrapped around stuff, like so. And then we're going to pick up a little piece of fabric, and it's just the backing and the batting, not the front of the quilt. Remember that. So we've picked up a little stitch, and we're kind of picking it up almost underneath our binding, but not quite. It's like it's perfectly aligned. And now we're going to go back through our binding, through the tunnel, and pop out like that. You see that? It's like we're sewing in the tunnel of the binding. And then we're popping out and just picking up a little bit of fabric right down below where we came out in our binding. So do you see that? We've popped out and we're picking up. And then again, so we've come out the back of our binding, or the back of our quilt. And now we're going to go into the binding. So we're just going to roll the binding and pinch it in place. And do you see that? It's like popped out there. And then we're going to go into the binding through that tunnel inside of the binding. And then immediately, once we come out of that, I'm going to try to focus in here. Immediately after poking out of the binding strip, we're going to pick through the backing and the batting of our quilt. Do you see that? It's not focusing very well, and I apologize. But it's immediate. There's no space between coming out of our binding strip and going into the backing of our quilt. That's how we're hiding our stitches. This is also called the whip stitch. Just snug it up. I know you can see some of my stitches right now, but it's a little bit difficult looking through the camera on my phone than it is in real life. It feels very strange. So anyway, we're going to continue on. So again, we've come out through the backing, and immediately below that, we're going to pop into the tunnel of our binding and back out, picking up a piece of the backing like that. And you will hardly notice any of your stitches. You'll see these tiny little picks. And reposition your binding as you go. This is why I don't like to bind all the way around the quilt, because I find that I always have to reposition it anyway, so I don't want to spend my time putting clips on when I know that I'm going to have to, reposition everything. So we're in the backing. We're going to go into the binding and then come immediately out of the binding into the backing and pick a little. I hope you can see that. It's not focusing the best, and I apologize, but if you can see that we've gone through the tunnel and we've picked up a little bit of stitch in the backing, but we're never going to the front of the quilt. That's a big no-no. I know there's no rules, and if you want that, then do it. I don't care. It's your quilt, but I just don't like the look of it myself, so that's like a rule I made for myself, even though I said that there's no rules in my other video, but that's like one of them, I guess. I was like, I don't like to see stitches on the front of my quilt from the binding, like from whip stitching it, or even, like, I don't even really like machine stitching my binding down, just because I don't want to see the stitches on the front of the quilt. That's a personal preference. That's not a rule. It's just a personal preference. But anyway, so we are going to continue in this fashion. So you're going to go through the tunnel, and your stitches are not going to be crazy long or anything like that, because you don't want gaps. And then I would say like no more than 1/4 inch apart, like 1/8, 1/4 inch. Usually I push it with 1/4 inch, but so we're going to do 1/4 inch stitches through the backing and the binding all the way to the corner. And then I'm going to show you how to do a corner, how I do corners anyway, to secure them and make them really neat. So we're going to continue, and I will meet you up at the corner. All right, so we have come to the corner of our binding, and we have folded over to give ourselves an idea of where our fold line should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of reposition our corner once we get there. And we're going to put a binding strip or binding clip on this side of it, just to help us keep this closed so we're not fighting it the entire time. So we're going to just pinch that down, hold that down. And our next stitch is going to pop out into the backing, just in between where we need to be to start our binding, or our corner rather. Okay, so we've come out right there. And this will be a little different for, each time you do this, because it doesn't need to be perfect. So I'm going to go into the backing, And there's like a little glue bit there because I glue basted this quilt, and I did glob it in this corner a little bit. So, but anyway, so I've come up right about there where our strips meet, right here on the outside edge. And now we're going to go into the binding on this side first. So we're going to go in, wherever we've come up is where we go into the binding. And we're going to go into the binding, and we're going to kind of work backwards a little bit. This is how I do them. And I find this works really well, and it's really neat. If I could get my needle in there. Okay, so I've brought up my needle into that, that tunnel that we create by folding the binding, right? And we're going to come right out at that edge where we folded it in. Like so. And then immediately we're going to go into the binding underneath. I'm going to pop up. And it is a little bit difficult because you're going through so many layers. But just take your time. Like that. And again, we're going to pop into the binding tunnel. And we're going to go to the very edge of the corner like that. See that? I could have done a little bit more, but whatever. Into that corner. And then again, you're going to pop down below and go into that strip. And we're going to go all the way in there, and we're going to pop out here at the edge there. And give it a snug little tug, but not really hard. And then again, you're going to go into this binding tunnel on the other side. And you're going to pop out just where that corner is, where we folded it. Hopefully you can see that. And just snug it up just ever so slightly. And because we're in the binding tunnel, I just have to reposition, sorry. Now that we're in that binding tunnel, we gotta go into the backing. So we're gonna go, and I've got a little bit of a glue glob there that I'm dealing with, so it wouldn't be this hard, I promise, but like that. Pull it out, and then you have a really nice, neat corner. And it's nice and secure too, the way that I do it. Somebody might do it differently, and that's fine, but I really like my method, so that's the way I do my corners. And they're nice and secure, and they look good on both sides. And they're nice and secure. You know, rub it, tug on it a little bit, and it's not going to go anywhere. All right, so that concludes this binding tutorial. I really hope that you got something out of it. And subscribe to the channel and come back often and visit my website for a free quilt pattern. I've got a little pot holder that's super cute. You can download it instantly by subscribing to my email. Links are in the description. Bye now.